speaking up, especially at the board meeting and everything, was something that I felt I had to do because when you have the discussion of trans issues, trans people inevitably need to be involved in those discussions. When you have, one person who has never had any experiences because, they identify as cisgender, and though they've done studies and they've worked with people, they never really understand. And when you are lecturing to a group of people who also do not have that understanding of what it's like, it becomes difficult to say, well, here's the policies we need to put in place for the comfort of, you know, these students as well as this few group of students. When I showed up last night, the meeting had been very quiet within the school. None of the other trans students had known that the meeting was going on. And even when I informed some of them, they just didn't show up. They didn't feel like it, or it just felt like maybe it wasn't their place. When I got there and realized that I was the only trans student there, I felt like I kind of had like a moral obligation to speak. And my my experiences and everything definitely are not what anyone else has gone through. I never try to speak for other people, but being the student that I am and having had the experiences that I have had, especially when it comes to policies that they're hoping to make that kind of protect my right to use the facility as I want, to get changed where I want, to just kind of have policies that protect me, especially when it comes to harassment, bullying, and everything. No one really said, hey, maybe let's involve a trans student and have them speak. No one came to me or any of the other students and said, hey, we're having a school board meeting on this. It would be very interesting if we could actually have your perspective. And they said it very well at the meeting. You can't just ask one specific person and then make policies, based on how one trans person did. But ultimately, I showed up and I did agree that I should not be the only voice speaking. I showed up and spoke because I felt that when it comes to issues in the school, we are lacking when it comes to communication. There is a lack of communication between trans students and their counselors. I myself am guilty of that. I have not been, seeking help probably that I needed to get. But there has also been a lack of communication coming from teachers, coming from administration and everything, because there really is no set procedure for it. When, trans students have an issue and it's a brand new issue, it's very uncomfortable to have to get into and deal with. But the more open discussions, the more questions that are being asked, particularly by the adults to the students, the more open communication can be, and the more that, you know, policies are allowed to reflect. There needs to be an open dialogue. It has to be from both ways. I can't sit there and expect everyone to bend over backwards for me. That's the last thing I want. I just want to be able to be myself and be comfortable while also not infringing on anyone else's comfort. And, you know, I'm not going to be a martyr and say, well, I sacrifice a lot for everyone. But in a sense, that is sort of true, is that when I'm being led to believe, well, you have to either make yourself super uncomfortable by being in the ladies' room, which obviously might make other females uncomfortable because they don't want to see some 6 foot tall dude who, you know, like bench presses like 40 pounds on each side. Like they don't want to see, him walking into the bathroom. But also sometimes being in the basement can be discomfort to me. I had no knowledge that it didn't have to be that way because there was a lack of communication. And I'm not necessarily upset about that. I'm just upset with the way that things are handled and the way that, trans students sometimes are being spoken to, where it's like, oh, well, you need to go out of your way to do this, you need to go out of your way to do this, or, oh, well, we can't do much about this, we can't look into this, and then suddenly, procedures change in a flash instant, and everyone's being kept in the dark on both ends. You know, ultimately, there needs to be communication, and there needs to be, between school board and trans students, between administration and trans students, between guidance and between teachers and between students and trans students, there needs to be an open dialogue. We can't have it like an open and shut book. You know, it's not just about changing my body and how I present to other people. It's about changing my mind and realizing that, you know, if I am in the wrong body, I have to kind of, first of all, learn to ultimately get that acceptance, but in a way that is not repressing who I am. And that I have to change almost every aspect of my life to match that. And that it's a lot harder for me than it is for a lot of other people because, you know, especially with the social backlash and everything, where everyone's saying, oh, it's unnatural. It's no more unnatural than people, you know, getting shots for vaccines or for, you know, getting insulin for their diabetes. It's helping me be more reaffirmed in who I am. If people come to me and ask me questions, I can speak on what I have done and what I have learned through my experiences. My experiences are definitely not the same as the other student, you know, who identifies as trans, or one who is in the junior high who identifies as trans, or someone who, you know, may not even realize they're trans yet. And it's definitely not something that I believe should be worked out on one's own. There needs to be a network of support. And by opening up dialogues and by being comfortable in discussing things, by kind of breaking barriers and saying, hey, I know it's uncomfortable, but the more we talk about it and the more we normalize it in a sense, the more we can get done with it. Because as I'm seeing currently with discussions, especially when it comes to bathrooms and locker rooms, one thing that makes it uncomfortable to discuss is how, I'm trying to think of how to say it, not normal it seems. How, oh, it's not normal to have a girl in the boys' room. Oh, it's not normal to have a boy in the girls' room. And it's not normal for people to be doing this. When you actively can go out and say, hey, listen, I am a normal teenager. I do things that every other teenager does. I am more than just this, or I am more than just that. When you can talk to them about it and say, hey, I'm comfortable this way, you kind of normalize it because people are saying, hey, it's not something I'm reading about in the news anymore. It's not some Supreme Court case. It's happening actively right here, especially in Exeter, in our county. It's happening everywhere. Every school is going to be dealing with this eventually if they're not already dealing with it. The more that we can have normal discussions about it and not pit anyone against each other, and the more that it is socially acceptable to discuss it in a very unbiased or very unpolitical way, the more friendly the topic gets, the easier it is to discuss it and look at it in kind of an objective nature. You can't, you know, someone who is completely unwilling to hear another side cannot obviously make a very unbiased decision on anything because obviously their personal feelings are going to be put into that. When you can kind of shut out your personal feelings and say, hey, I realize you're going through this, but also here are other sides that you have no idea about. When you can get that from both ends, that's ultimately when things can get done. When you have, oh, well, I wasn't certain that this could happen. When you have that uncertainty, or when you have, oh, well, I was uncomfortable coming to you, or, oh, I had no idea that I could do this, or you have, oh, well, I thought that you would have done this, or I thought that you would have done this. When you just are assuming things, or when you're only looking at it from one standpoint, you can never really get a sense of the full picture. And when you never get a sense of the full picture, things are never going to be done. You're going to have misinformation spreading. You're going to have, you know, the comfort and ultimately the safety of certain students at risk. If we are able to just be happy in our own skins, even if we have to change, you know, our name, or if we have to change, you know, our haircut, or our outfit, or just how we speak, or, you know, the different social norms that are associated with gender, if we can learn to accept ourselves in that aspect, that's all we want, is just to do what makes us most comfortable without hurting anybody. I I hardly believe that using the right bathroom or the right locker room will ever hurt anybody. I have no desire to hurt anybody else. And ultimately, I'm looking at I'm looking out for myself in a sense, and that if I'm doing something that makes me comfortable and no one else is getting physically harmed, if I'm not insulting anybody, then I don't see what the problem is. To me, speaking out, especially about that at the school board meeting, was something that kind of helped me kind of come out and realize that I had been so uncomfortable with talking about it for so long that now, especially since no other student wanted to, and I kind of had to go out and share my experience, it's easier to talk about now because I had been practicing for days what I was going to say. And suddenly, now that I spoke about it once, it's like, spilling out. And it's like I can freely talk about it now because I know that I have a support network. And I know that I definitely have, people who want to hear my voice. Before, when you're kind of kept in the dark about it, or when students are telling you, well, it's uncomfortable when you talk about it, that's why we need to talk about it, is because to them it's uncomfortable. To me, it's my entire life.